I'm curious here about this statement. This was actually in the stories back about the Big 12 exploring private equity, which goes back a little ways. But CBS, which was the public equity company that was referenced here, this story said CBS estimated the next Big 12 media rights deal will at least double when the current deal worth $2.3 billion overall expires in 2031. Now, I heard that and thought, well, that seems pretty lofty. I guess what's your reaction to that projection there?
That's private equity talking. They probably haven't done a ton of rights deals, but I think from their standpoint, they want to show their potential investors that they think they can hit a home run on a deal and get it to double. In this day and age, it seems a little lofty given the state of the linear TV business and the streaming not quite providing the complete answer to what ESPN and Fox have to do in order to monetize these rights. So it seems lofty. I'm sure they'll get an increase, but doubling seems a bit optimistic in my mind.
I've seen John Wilner lately float this out. This is his idea that he thinks could help add TV value for the Big 12, and I thought actually some of this seems to make sense. So I want your reaction to how much value you think this could actually add. But he's proposed playing a Big 12 football game like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, that Wednesday night, or playing conference games the Sunday of Labor Day weekend, which obviously we just saw. I mean, a lot of people watch the LSU-USC game if you could get games in that sort of window. And he even said perhaps trying to go up against the NFL sometimes on Sunday night and starting the games late, utilizing the fact that you have the West Coast in play a little bit now, or the Mountain Time Zone at least. How much value could potentially be added if you try to get creative with some of those windows?
Well, I think John's on the right track, and we had discussed that about whether do you really want to go up against the NFL, and I don't know that I'd spend a whole lot of time doing that, but I'd certainly go to windows that aren't currently utilized and fill those up. I like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I've always liked Labor Day, and the Sunday of Labor Day, it's hard to get people to do that necessarily. But you really need to get in there and start exploiting some of these unused windows, because you look on a typical Saturday and there's 4 windows and they're jam-packed, and so you're always up against somebody, at least 2 other, if not 3, nationally televised games. So for to have the ability to get outside of those overcrowded windows to one that you own on your own makes a lot of sense. Going up at the NFL, any way, shape, or form, we'll see what happens with the college football playoffs this year, when there's going to be a couple of games up against some good NFL games. And there's a reason that the NFL's the 800-pound gorilla. They're big and they're bad and they're going to stomp all over you. So it's I would schedule against the NFL at your own risk, but the other windows, it makes a lot of sense. I think could add value. The problem is TV's a copycat business. You get one group doing it, everybody else is going to start looking at it as well. And then all of a sudden, Sunday, Labor Day Sunday is just jam packed with, half the games that used to be on Saturday are now flipping over to Sunday. And you never know. The other thing is you never know when the NFL might expand their schedule. There's talk that they're going to add another game. And so do they start early, or do they just extend the season another week on the back end? So that's something you have to be careful of as well. But it can add some definite value, and certainly can get you to a point where your programs are being showcased because there's really nothing else going on at that time. And I think that's really important for the Big 12.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, the last thing I would ask here is about, a lot of people have speculated, hey, a lot of these TV deals are going to run up in college football in the early 2030s. Is that a time when we could see a consolidation, a super league? Dennis Dodd from CBS has pushed this recently. Like, hey, that's when we could actually see this happen from the TV perspective on that. Like, would the networks, do you think, be interested in, at that point, further consolidation of the sport and jumping in bed with everybody on that? Or would they prefer to just keep it the way that it kind of is right now?
2030 more or less is going to be a very important time for college football. Movement, as we've seen over the last 25 years, always occurs at the expiration of TV deals. It's always been that way. I think that if the schools and conferences want dollars to continue to grow, they're going to have to look at potentially different structure, because it's all about markets and matchups. That's what football, what the networks pay for. And so to the extent you have maybe lesser performing schools within a conference, that the networks have to televise as part of the thing, and the matchups aren't, strong every single Saturday, they're not going to pay the money. And so the best way to get better matchups is to put all the top schools in a single entity. Now, does that make sense? I don't know. And that's not for me to decide. But I think the fact is, if you do want bigger dollars, you're going to have better matchups that run throughout the season. And that may require, I call it the up and out move, where you take 48 top schools, something like that. And, they play a schedule. And that doesn't mean the other schools in the Power Four conferences don't play football. They just don't play at that top level. And maybe they have a separate playoff. And, the super conference idea has been floating around for a long time. Whether it comes back in 2030, we'll know here pretty soon, because it's going to be planned well in advance, and that stuff always starts leaking. So those are the next big dates, without a doubt, because everybody's deals are coming up. CFP's coming up. The NFL has an out on their TV deals around there as well. So there's going to be a lot of movement, or there's a lot of stuff in play, and that usually is what creates change or uncertainty. And so people will try and fill that void.
Is there any thought in the TV world to like long-term damage? You might be just diminishing returns, if the sport becomes less popular because of doing things like that, or like 15 years from now, USC versus Oklahoma isn't as attractive because one of those schools now is inevitably losing more games when you do the Super League. I know that's something like we in Big 12 country talk about a lot, but I didn't know if that's anything that like registers on a bigger level with people there.
I don't know about that. I mean, it's like TV's not shy about admitting mistakes and then making a change. I mean, that's why we cancel shows all the time. It's like, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but then, it turns out that the show doesn't perform. So you just, sorry, you're out. And it would be a similar type thing with the Super League. If somehow it doesn't pan out, then certainly they would either take their money and go somewhere else, or try and tweak the structure. Does it add relegation to the mix, or advancement, so that there's a way for schools to continue to, kind of move up in the food chain, and others who, may get to a point where football's important now, but they de-emphasize it in the future because they're not attracting as many students or something like that. So TV side is not afraid to admit things aren't working and ask for changes, because from the dollars they're shelling out, they're going to want it to perform. And I think this year is going to be interesting, because after all the realignment moves, it's going to be interesting to see how much of the how the ratings do. Is there a new curiosity factor because people are turning in to see matchups, that have never really happened before on a consistent basis? And I tell you that we haven't had a lot of conference games early that would have a curiosity factor. There's been a lot of good matchups early that had, and the numbers have been really, really good. I mean, the USC LSU did like 9.2 million, and that was, after DirecTV turned the signal off right before the game started. So that's a pretty stout number for a Sunday night in college. We don't have a lot to compare it to, and it's certainly not NFL numbers, but it's a very promising number. And the Saturday games are very promising, and the week 0 games were very promising with, the Notre Dame, Georgia Tech FSU game, doing a really good number at like $4.5 million.